So, Chris, I appreciate you taking time out to talk about Oklahoma, particularly as you're nearing the end of your run with the show, since the tour is going to conclude next month. And given that you're at the end of the tour, I'm wondering, what do you know now about Judd that would surprise what you thought you knew about Judd when you first took on this role?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm lucky, I guess, in that I've been able to continue to mine it and discover things throughout throughout the process. I mean, I've been struck recently just by how much sorry, this is a truck going by. How much antagonism he faces by doing so very little. Um, I mean, this play is like full of men pursuing women, and there's a lot of like very misogynistic, dominating language that's used throughout this play by all of the men in it. And I'm struck more and more as I listen to the play every night how 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 much of it is allowed for other characters in this play, and how little of it is kind of tolerated from Judd, aka the bad guy, and just how you know how little sense that makes. And I also just feel like as I've done it more and more, I'm struck by people's reactions to the role, and by people telling me that they've seen things that they never thought they'd see in the character, that they had a different experience going through the journey of this play because of the particular, take on Judd. So that's been really enlivening and kind of helpful to hear as we've been going through the country.
Well, it's interesting that you describe Judd as the bad guy, because I don't think Judd's the bad guy in the piece.
Right, right.
I think that because we've had people like Patrick Wilson and Hugh Jackman, and Alfred Drake assume the role of Curly, that we assume that Curly is the good guy and the hero, and he's the one who gets the girl at the end.
Right.
Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, this is a man who tries to convince another man to kill himself.
You're entirely correct.
This is our good guy.
No, I know he's not at all, and it is funny doing it live and feeling the audience from the very get-go be like, oh, that's Curly, he should be with the girl. And it's funny to feel that assumption, because all of his actions, if you just take them on as they are on paper, he's a schmuck. I mean, like he's a horrible person. He's like giving Laurey a bunch of like shit, and he's with another woman at the same time, and he tells Judd to kill himself. And like he's by no means a perfect gentleman, but for some reason there's this perfect ideal version of what a Western rough and tough man should be, and Curly embodies that. And so regardless of what he says or does, right, the audience applauds at the end when he and Laurey get together, because that's the way it's supposed to be. And yeah, like someone saw the show this week and sent me a text and was like, it's crazy how it's such a radical idea for us as Americans to feel empathy for the outsider, aka Judd. And that's really why he is the quote unquote bad guy, simply because he's the outsider in this community. And I think in this country, we hold very dear to our identity, and our identity is made in part by deciding who is not in our community. And so in this play, that is very much Judd.
Right. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, Ron DeSantis sending immigrants to another state.
Exactly.
To the whole outsider idea. Well, I'm going to flip the outsider concept on its head for just a second, because, at Circle in the Square, you understudied all the male roles. And I don't know how often you performed any of them, but it seems to me that probably better than anyone else, except for perhaps Daniel Fish, you have a real understanding of what makes each one of these characters tick. And I'm wondering what that perspective has given you in terms of both your understanding and appreciation of the show, and also how you play opposite other actors who are playing these characters that you've also played.
That's a great question, and it's true. I mean, I have such a deep appreciation for this play because I've approached it from literally every single male character's perspective. And I see how different each character's journey is through the play and what each character gives, and that specifically only that character kind of contributes to the overall story. I mean, Rodgers and Hammerstein and Lynn Riggs, who wrote Green Grows the Lilacs, they did a really great job. It's like, it's almost Shakespeare. It's so well written, it's so precise, and it can handle so much. This like classic American, 1943 musical. It can really handle as much as you're willing to put into it. And so yeah, like when I learned all these tracks and I would watch it, knowing what like Curly's energy versus Judd's in that love triangle, and then the two, comedic uh, characters of Will Parker and Allie Hackham, and how they kind of play as foils for each other, and what you have to bring in order for the other person to be able to do their job. It's for sure given me a lot of I'd say also just a lot of relief, because as an actor, you want to do so much and you really want to give it your all. And at the same time, you also at a certain point need to know when enough is enough, and when you're actually stepping on the toes of other people on stage, and when you're actually muddying the story because you're trying to tell too much of a whole. It's really important as an actor to know exactly where you fit and how you can serve the piece, and just to do that really well and to the best of your abilities. And so getting to watch amazing actors on Broadway and see how they all found their way into their characters, and then through that explore my way into those characters, it gave me such a solid frame to then approach the tour and just playing Judd and be able to narrow in on one role. And I'll tell you, after knowing 5 different roles and songs and choreography and characters, it feels like oh, that's my son's train going. Sorry, I'm gonna wave hi to him. Yeah, having done all of that work and then just getting to focus on one role is it feels a bit like taking, going from like the 50-pound dumbbells to 10 pounds, where I can just focus and hone in on this one character.
Right. Well, I think that there's a humanity to Judd that is central to our having empathy for him. And what was your process of understanding that empathy was there, and then figuring out how best to get that across to audiences who may just assume that Curly's the good guy, so why do I have to care about Judd?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a natural inclination towards Judd. I mean, just as an actor, I'm drawn to outsiders. I'm drawn to anti-heroes. I'm drawn to kind of people whose convictions are counter to the culture and community that they're a part of. And so in this production, it's funny, Daniel Fish and I don't think ever had a real conversation about the inner workings of Judd. I just think that he saw in me, and I saw in him, that this kind of understanding that this human is as complex and as multidimensional as any great character, and that neither one of us wanted to diminish him ever to being an antagonist or a villain or the foil to something else. And yeah, every night when I go on stage, something kind of amazing happens where, I mean, right, as an actor, we're always trying to listen and be present. And there's this moment in the play where I can feel the audience, if they're truly listening, I can feel this kind of energy shift where they click into the fact that this production isn't going the way that they thought it would go, and that this character is going on a journey where they're not being asked to laugh and point and kind of be afraid of him, but they're actually kind of locking into his inner workings and a bit of his fear and his hope and his anxiety. And through that, I think it really shifts the focus of the story of Oklahoma to being about this community and how they decide who is a part of it and who isn't. I mean, the story of Oklahoma, you look at it just factually, it's about a territory becoming a state, right? It's about this territory joining the Union and assuming its identity as Oklahoma. Um, and in that, they're deciding what rules they're going to abide by and who they want to be in their club. And it's pretty clear by the end of this production that not everyone gets to join the club, and Judd unfortunately gets kicked out in so many words. Have you seen it yet? Have you seen this production?
Well, first off, I saw it at Circle in the Square,
Right.
which I found, I mean, between you and me, I preferred the intimacy of that space as opposed to being on a big stage like the Amundsen. But I know that touring, mathematics require maximum number of people in the shortest amount of time.
Right.
So I get it, but I miss the intimacy of Circle in the Square. But yeah, I've seen it twice, and this is the only production of Oklahoma I've ever seen. I had only seen the movie beforehand.
Oh wow.
And I describe it as not your parents' Oklahoma.
It's true. It's very true.
Well, I want to ask you about part of it that makes it unique, which is the blackouts in the show.
Yeah.
Which you are a part of, both of them.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, as an actor, how you deal with the blackout scene, particularly something like Poor Judd is Dead, where you only come on screen, the video only happens late in that whole conversation.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what's going through your mind as an actor, knowing the audience can't see you until the video comes on, and that's a cue, what that is. But what you do I'm sure you just stay completely in character, but what are the challenges of being in blackout scenes? Because both of those scenes are intense.
Yes, they are very intense. I mean, I'm reminded in those moments, right, that it's theater, and we call it an audience, right? It is primarily about hearing the story, which is, I think, the great difference between film and theater, right? It's if you boil it down, theater is about an oral experience, and in those moments, for me, it just heightens the relationship between the actor and the audience, right? I mean, truly, all that you have to go off of in those moments is what's being said, right, on the mics. And so I always feel like, as an actor, I think I said this already, but my job is to listen. And when you're in a rehearsal room, it's hard because you've all heard the story so many times and you've worked it over and over again. And then there's that first night with an audience where you're like, oh, right, this is the first time they're hearing this. And if you can click into that, you can kind of give over to that ride as well. And so those moments when the lights go out, for me, is kind of a mirror to that, of having that first audience where I can click into, oh, right, all I have is the sound of Sean Grandillo's, aka Curly's, voice. That's all that I have to go off of. And in a way, it becomes freeing because my mind can connect in ways and associate things that maybe when I'm looking at the stage or I'm seeing the actors, I'm not as inclined to do. And I think for the audience as well, you start to you tether yourself to the sounds, and when you don't have something to visualize with it, your brain starts to fill in what's happening, right? Your brain starts to complete the picture. And in a way, I think it asks the audience to engage a little bit more because we're not giving them that visual component that they're used to for the first 55 minutes of the play. So yeah, for me, it's this invitation to kind of lean in further and invest more. And as you know, I spend the first 50 minutes on stage listening, more or less, to what's happening. So it's all just really a test of, like, can you listen more? Can you listen more? Can you listen more? And then when the lights go out, it's just one kind of step further to dig into what's about to happen. So yeah, I don't get tired of it, doing it night after night, really. That journey of Act 1 of Judd, going from full stage, full light on the audience and actors, full cast on stage. And then as the show goes on, people start to leave one by one until it's just Curly and I, and then the lights go out. It really does feel like a full journey. technically and storytelling wise.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think that Rodgers and Hammerstein don't get enough credit, and I blame the movies mostly. But they don't get enough credit for the depth of what they're actually writing about.
Yeah.
So it surprised me when I read that Oscar Hammerstein III was quoted in the New York Post as having said that his grandfather and Richard Rodgers would be rolling in their graves if they saw this current production that defies what the words mean and what the songs represented. I think he's completely misunderstanding what his grandfather and his collaborator did. I mean, isn't this a play that is about something and not just about, oh, what a beautiful morning?
Of course. It's funny you say that because I feel like I just read a quote from Hammerstein that's, I'm really paraphrasing, but I think it was something along the lines of like, if the story doesn't have sex, it's not worth telling. If that's a misquote, I apologize, but I'm almost positive I just saw something say that. No, I mean, the story is so dark and entertaining at the same time. And I feel that telling the story, it's like, it's funny and it's sexy. I mean, we're not making anything up. These characters are talking about like naked women and about owning bodies and about, about enticing people and about death and about ownership of land. I mean, we're not making any of these themes up. It's all in there. And you think about being American, right? And like this need to kind of control and possess and be independent, but also liberated and like it's all real. And for me, with this production, I mean, when we're singing Oklahoma, I feel like we could be singing America in some of these places, right? Like it has such a weight of identity tied to it. And for me, what we're doing this production is we're simply saying to the audience, hey, like, let's love being who we are. And if we're going to do that, we have to acknowledge all of what we are, the ugly parts, the funny parts, the sexy parts, the maddening parts, and the ultimately, deadly parts of our identity. It's all there. So I truly feel like, this our director, he's not trying to put anything on top of it. He's not trying to twist it into manipulating it. He's trying to actually listen to what's on the page and allow an audience to listen to it as if for the first time and hear it again, brand new.
Which also would seemingly make it easier for a company of actors to bring that to life if you listen to what's on the page.
Exactly.
Well, I want to ask you about something that you posted on Tony Sunday in 2019 on your Instagram account. Because it was a whole series of questions that you were asking about, do audiences celebrate the show for its radical approach? But you go on to say, amongst those questions is it really radical because it refuses to applaud the audience for coming to see it? Which is something that I feel like so much of theater now is like placation, and audiences standing as if, wow, I made it through. Can you elaborate from an actor's point of view what you meant by that and what your perspective is on that?
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember writing that, and I remember feeling it, feeling that this production of this production is the first musical that I had ever seen where the ending wasn't a kind of celebration of the audience having gotten through the show, right? And so much of musical theater, I feel like it's always about the happy ending. It's always about, and now our story is complete, right? It's always it is a bit of placating the audience. Thank you so much for coming. Please buy the CD and cast recording and tell your friends to come as well. They've got to see it. And when I experienced the ending of this, I felt like I, as an audience member, was being celebrated, but in a very different way. I feel like this musical at the end is kind of challenging the audiences to receive it, right? The ending of this is no less engaging of the audience. In fact, I would say it's probably more engaging than a typical, musical is. It's just that the way that it engages the audience is it challenges them, and it asks them to fully receive the images that we are presenting towards them. And it's amazing to see people's faces because they're not used to being acknowledged in that way at the end of a musical, right? So like on Broadway, I remember, right, because it's the reprise of Oklahoma, and I remember when I was on one show, there was a mother and her daughter sitting there, and the reprise starts, and you see the mom start to clap, and you just see the daughter staring straight ahead, reach over to her mom and grab her hand and put it down, right? And so you have this like unsure audience where they're being asked to be in a situation that they've never been asked to be in at the end of a musical, and no one quite knows how to respond, because normally the last song is when everyone starts clapping along and singing along and celebrating, and instead we're just staring at people in our state that we're in singing the song in a very rousing but not celebratory way, and people in the audience don't know what to do. And it's that sensation of like, what is happening and what am I supposed to do, that I feel like wakes people up. And it's also just such a clear, I think it's such a clear image and summation of what this production of Oklahoma is. Again, I'm not going to give it away, but I remember a friend of mine who saw it in San Francisco said, when I saw that last image, the entire play clicked for me. He almost thought that Daniel had almost started with that ending and then worked his way from the end to the beginning, kind of in reverse, to figure out how to get to there. But yeah, it's the kind of theater I want to do. So I feel lucky that I'm able to tell it for a couple more weeks here in LA. Yeah.
Well, so at the risk of dismissing another show, I'm assuming Mamma Mia is not exactly what your first choice would be as a job.
I have to say, so like we've been touring all over the country, and we've had some very varied reactions, and some people have said, this was the worst musical I've seen in 30 years of my subscription at so-and-so theater and so-and-so place in the country. And I have to say, I know that they've seen at least 7 productions of Sound of Music and Cats and Mamma Mia and everything else. And when I hear that, I actually feel proud, because I'm like, okay, I know that we're doing something worthwhile if this is the worst thing that this person has seen in their 20, 30-year history of seeing theater here. So yeah.
Yes, well, and we get Cats here in Los Angeles in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I don't want to talk bad about any.
Oh, go for it. No, I'm not going anywhere near that theater. Once was enough.
Yeah.
On that same Instagram post, you asked a question that I want you to answer. Are we nervous to have our musicals actually look at our audiences? Is that radical? I'm assuming, you have an answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think it is still radical, because, well, not to get on a huge rant, but I think that any piece of art that truly invites its audience to question themselves or their state of being, living here, is a radical idea, because people don't like to be questioned, and people don't like to rethink what they assume they know. And ultimately, musical theater, which is almost all commercial theater, is about, profits and making money and telling the story to as many people as possible. And if you want to engage with the largest amount of people, you're going to produce something that can be easily digested by the largest amount of people. And I don't think this is just true of musical theater. I think it's true of any art in the capitalist society, where you're always you're always thinking about marketability as much as you are artistic integrity. And Daniel Fish is a producer's best dream and worst nightmare, because he is going to make something that's fully engaging, but he's also never going to apologize for it, and he's not going to back down, and he's not going to water it down either. And I love that, because I never know if an audience is going to embrace this musical or hate it. And I've experienced both reactions, both in liberal parts of the country, in conservative parts of the country, in huge theater cities, and in places that, you know, that the regional touring house is their only kind of source of performance space. And I love that. I love that, because what he's doing is so personal that there's no way to know how you're going to react to it until you see it. Like I love that theater nerds and professionals and critics hate the show. I love it, because it's not just about, you know, the theater elite or the educated or the cultured. I truly think that what he's doing is probing into personal questions through this classic American musical, and as a result, people are having to respond to it personally.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a personal question then at this point, as we near the end of our conversation. What is going to be the best and worst part about saying goodbye to this show and to this role when the tour concludes in Arizona?
Oh, the best part is just knowing that I gave it my all. The best part is just knowing that I had an opportunity to tell the story in this production and play this role, and know that, like, whether I was in, you know, Charleston, South Carolina, or Chicago, or Huntsville, Alabama, or Los Angeles, I truly gave it my all every time. And I can walk away being content with that. And the worst thing is that, you know, with any ending, you have to kind of say goodbye, and just trust that you'll work again.
Well, and that casting directors don't think of you just as one type of actor because they've seen you in this role.
Sure, yeah. I'm glad I did this role, and I will have I'll invite everyone that I can in LA to see it. And yes, it's a very specific role, but that doesn't mean that I can't do other things. So yes, I'm so grateful for it, and for the chance to sing and tell the story to as many people as we've been able to tell it to. And I look forward to the next story I get to tell.
Great. Do you have time for one last question?
Yeah, sure thing.
Great. I am going to quote something Oscar Hammerstein II said.
Oh, great. Okay.
He said, if you really believe in the brotherhood of man and you want to come into its fold, you've got to let everyone else in too. It seems like that he could have said that about Oklahoma. And I'm wondering if that statement resonates with you and with the character you're playing in Oklahoma, Judd.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, and I think ultimately that's the downer of telling the truth with this show, right? Is that people celebrate it as this, like, celebration of identity. And if you're going to celebrate the show as a kind of celebration of identity, then you have to, when you see the show, accept the fact that you're celebrating this community that is not embracing a full brotherhood of man, right? And so therefore the identity of this community, aka Oklahoma, aka the United States of America, fully embracing that, is acknowledging the fact that we are selective and exclusive, and that's defined our identity. You know, whether it's Irish immigrants or Italian immigrants or African Americans or Hispanics or Asian American. I mean, you know, like the rate of exclusion is just impressive, right? And it's always changing. And it just, for me, what that tells me is that it's not actually about who you're excluding, it's the act of excluding. Right? Well, oh, okay, you're now accepted. Well, now they're not, right? I mean, it's just this need. It's this need to push someone away because it's intrinsically tied to our sense of self as a country. And so if we're going from what Hammerstein said, then I think this musical is a beautiful way to have many, many, many people engage with the truth that when territories become states, they have to push people out.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this, Chris. Thank you for taking the time.